As long as Nechama is on, that's what matters. We will begin. Hopefully, we'll finish.
She's on.
I know.
She's on.
Hopefully, we'll finish before we begin the sixth chapter of this very, very meaty chapter called Hilchos Deos. It has lots and lots of material in it, some good stuff. And we were discussing the very, very difficult mitzvah of Tochacha. Remember, we said last night, like the survey says, top three most difficult mitzvahs to perform. And just when you thought it was difficult, the Rambam is going to even go into more detail about why it's even more difficult than what we thought. So we're going to start from 7. Okay. Actually, 8. We did 7 yesterday. We're going to start with 8. Halacha ches. Hamochiach es chaver tchila lo yidaber lo kashot ad shayach limenu. So the Rambam is, in this halacha, he's going to give, this is the guidelines, right, for, let's say, the bacher that just came back from Shana Bet, and he's all religious now, he flipped, and he comes back and he says, I'm going to give Musar to all these people, right? So the Rambam has to give you, some kind of guidelines to how do you actually do it, right? The Torah just says, Hocheach tocheach, right? Es amisecha. But that's the part that everyone remembers. No one remembers how the pasuk ends. Only a few people. The way the pasuk actually ends is v'lo tisa alav chet, meaning you have to do it, right? This difficult mitzvah of tochacha, but you can't sin. So that's why the Rambam says you cannot speak to him in such a harsh way that the guy gets embarrassed. You have to have a gvul, right? You can't go past the red line. I might think that what? You should admonish this person that sins, right? Until he turns red, right? Literally, his face turns colors. Talmud lomar velotisa alav chet. Okay, do not sin. Mikan she'asur la'adam lahachlim es Yisrael, the kol sheken barabim. So the Rambam takes the opportunity to jump on the general rule about not embarrassing someone. It's definitely not a good idea to embarrass someone generally, but especially the Torah ties it to tochacha. Why? Because you would think that, hey, on the one hand, I have to get my point across. So if he gets embarrassed, I can't help it. I mean, it's a human reaction. So how do we deal with this, dichotomy of on the one hand trying to, help someone spiritually by guiding them, but on the other hand, you can't, break that barrier where they get really, really embarrassed. So that's why it's difficult. That's the added layer of why it's even more difficult than what we thought yesterday. So that's the Rambam over here, and he takes the opportunity to introduce this subsection called Mavayish Barabim. Okay, and the Rambam says Afal Pisha Hamachlim Es Chaver Eno Loke Alav Avon Gadol. Technically, if I embarrass you, it's certainly bad, but I don't get malchus, okay, because it's technically not malchus a bull. Okay, Kach Amru Chachamim. The Rambam here quotes the Gemara at the end of Sanhedrin regarding people who don't have chelik in olam haba. It says Hamal ben pnei chaver barabim ein lo chelik leolam haba. Okay, so he quotes the Gemara. There's 2 Gemaras about Malbim Pnei Chavero. Well, not just 2. There's actually 5, I believe, 4 or 5. But there's one type that says Malbim Pnei Chaver Barabim Ein Lo Chelik Lo Haba. Then there's another Gemara that we had in a few places. We had it in Sota. We have it at the end of Malchus, where it says Mutav, right? Noach Lo Adam, right? To jump into the Kivshana Eish. Right, Va'al, right, Sheyapel Kivshan Esh, right? V'lo lachlim v'lo yivayish as chaver barabim, right? It's better to give up your own life, right, than to actually embarrass somebody. So the Gemara in Bava Metzia says the problem of embarrassing someone, right, is the Ayla Sumka, because the red, you're literally causing red to appear like, tantamount to murder, right, because he gets the red face. That's the svara. So yeah, and we learn it, if you remember, from Tamar. Remember where Tamar one-upped Yehuda, and Yehuda said Tzadka Mimeni at the end when it was revealed that who the real father was, and the fact that she wasn't Mizana, and Yehuda was proven wrong. But Tamar said, "I'll take one for the team, and I'd rather die." This is what Tamar said, according to the Gemaras in Sota and in Makos. I'd rather die than publicly embarrass Yehuda. All right, and there's much to talk about. Just I'll end up with one line. Tosfos I believe over there asks, so how come this isn't one of the big three? Right, we know there's three things you have to give your life over. So there's a few answers, because it's not really direct, it's indirect, it's not really written. But anyways, Tosfos actually entertains that question of embarrassing someone in public. Or humiliating someone in public is such a big thing, then how come we don't call it one of the big three? Okay, anyways, so that's the Rambam over here, and he says, Lefichach tzarich adam lehizaher shlo levayish chaver barabim bein katan ubein gadol. It doesn't matter if he's a katan or a gadol. V'lo yikra lo b'shem shehu bosh mimenu. And part of embarrassing is, let's say someone has a nickname, right? Let's say his nickname is Fatso, right? It's a mean thing, and if you know that if he's going to get insulted, you can't call him that name. Don't say something in front of him that he's going to get upset about, something that's very, very sensitive to him. Okay, so that's the end of the segue that the Rambam discusses about busha. Getting back to the tochacha, remember that we said that you have to steer clear of embarrassing the person. Okay, so what kind of sin the Rambam qualifies over here? And he says, what kind of sin is it that you're admonishing someone for? So we thought any sin. So the Rambam says no. And the Rambam actually has support from a Gemara at the end of Yuma, what he's about to say, in case you're wondering, because it sounds a little bit, kitzoni. But he says, if Ruvain is giving musar to Shimon because Ruvain was just wronged by Shimon, okay, because Shimon did something personal, ben adam l'chavero, or Shimon did something to Levi. Whatever Shimon's getting yelled at by Ruvain, it's because Shimon committed a sin. That was what we call in the ben adam l'chavero category. Aval b'divrei shamayim, if Shimon did something publicly, that's a ben adam l'makom, right? That's what we call chilul Hashem barabim. Very, very bad thing. We had it many times. If you remember, the Rambam himself spoke about Machal Shemayim right back in the, who could remember anymore, the third chapter or fourth chapter of this book of Hilchas Deos, right? Machal Shem Shemayim b'farhesia is the ultimate cardinal sin. So that's why the Rambam says, if it's divrei Shemayim in lo chazer bo b'seiter, if Shimon did not accept this rebuke, Ruvain is entitled, and more than entitled, he is obligated to embarrass him, machlimin oso barabim, umefarsim imcheto, and he's allowed to publish it on page 3 of the Jewish press, umecharfin oso befanav, and he's allowed to curse Shimon to his face, umevazin, umekalolin oso, right? You throw the book at him. Until Shimon changes his ways and admits wrong and does tshuva. Kamosha asu kol hanavim liYisrael. Again, very, very hard to to stomach that this is in fact true. But like I said, he does get this from a Gemara at the end of Yuma, like on Pevav, Pezayin, where it talks about these kinds of sins that someone does. You have to publicize it. And the Rambam ends off by saying, after all, just pick up your, Yirmiyahu, Yecheskel, Yeshaya, right? And just open up. And you'll find on virtually every page, the nevuah that these neviim got, and they were very, very stern, and they cursed, and they said really nasty things. So that's where the Rambam gets his source from. Okay, continuing on, let's try to finish the parak. Misha chata alav chavero v'lo ratza lahochicho. So, if someone sinned, right? If, let's say, Ruvain did something wrong to Shimon, okay? And Shimon said, you know what? I'm going to take the high road. And I am not going to mention it at all. I'm going to be silent. Why? Because the person who sinned or who wronged Shimon was himself. He was not educated. He was what we call a hedyot, or he was a little slow, let's call it in today's lingo. All right, he was, as we say, mentally disturbed. Okay, so therefore he didn't feel like admonishing him would help. So he made a decision, and he said, I'm going to take the high road. So the Rambam says, Umachalo belibo, v'lo stamo. If you could actually say to yourself that I forgive this person and I will not hate him. You remember yesterday we talked about hating, right? That's the worst. If you don't do anything and you continue this animosity in your heart. So if this person can honestly tell you that he does not hate him, okay, for doing what he did, and if I back away and take the high road and zip my lip, that's what the Rambam calls midas chasidus. That is the ultimate level. Because lo hikpid Torah ela al hamastema. Because the Torah only cares, is a makpid about carrying this feeling of hate. Right? That's what we said yesterday. It's worse to hate someone, right, than anything else, than actually beating them up. Right? That was the Rambam, if you remember the Chinuch last night, quoted from the Sifra. That's what we learned last night. Okay, we're going to do the last one in this perek, and that is about the very, very big topic of almanos and yesomim. Okay, so remember how the Rambam said that there's 36, or actually the Rambam didn't say it, the Gemara in Bava Metzia says there's 36 places in the Torah, or 46 places, where we're admonished to love Gerim and don't remind Gerim, and Gerim, right? So here, the next runner-up to Gerim on that scale are Almanos and Yesomim. Okay, we have to bend over backwards to be very, very careful when it comes to dealing with Almanos and Yesomim. And here is where the Rambam decides to talk about. So why are we so sensitive? So the Rambam says, because they're very, very, their spirits are low, and they're very, depressed and sad, and, being the way, life events turned out. And the Rambam ends off the sentence by saying, Afal pi shehen bale mamon. Even if their last name is Rockefeller, they may have lots and lots of money, but that doesn't mean that they're happy. All right? Happiness and money, we're not going to talk about now how, inversely proportional they can be. So, afilu almana social melech v'yisomov mutarin. And the Rambam's proof is even if the king dies and he leaves an almana and yisomim, mutarin anu alehen, we're muzar, right? We have to be careful. And shenemar, Okay, so there are many sources in the Torah, but the first one is from Parshas Mishpatim that we learned about a month ago. It says Kol Almana v'Yasom Lo Ta'anun. So that is clear as day. The Torah says you cannot oppress widows and orphans. Okay? Interesting discussion. How do you define an orphan? Is it both parents or one parent? So, believe it or not, legally, it's not so clear. Most assume that it's both parents, but in halacha, anytime we have the term yisomim, right, it's generally from the father. But we're going to see the Rambam at the end, who disagrees. So it's not so clear, like pretty much everything else. So the Rambam says, "V'heich nehagin imahen." So let's give some tachlis. What is some good advice how to deal with yisomim? Lo yidaber lehem el harachat. Be very gentle with them. V'lo yinag behen ela min hakavod. This is for yisomim and almanos, widows. V'lo yachav gufam bavoda v'libam b'dvarim kashim. Don't work them hard, or don't oppress them and annoy them. V'yachas al mamonim yotem atzmo. Be careful with their money if you're investing their money. Be very, very careful. More careful than with your own money. Kol hamaknitan o machisan o hichiv lahen o rada behen o ibn mamonam. If you annoy them or oppress them or get them angry or tick them off, right, or lose their money, God forbid, hareza over below taseh. Okay, that is a no-no. You're over a lav. V'kol sheken hamaka osan o hamakalan. Certainly, if you physically abuse them, that is really, really a bad idea. So you may think that this person is going to get a lav, right? Right? You're telling me how awful this is. So the Rambam says, believe it or not, there's no malchus. There's no malchus. But you have something worse than malchus. The onesh, the punishment, this is a rare case where the Torah explicates the punishment. It says, the Torah actually says, "V'chara api v'haragti eschem b'charev," and this is toward the end of, I believe, Shishi in Mishpatim, where it says, if you oppress the widow and the orphan, I, God, personally, right, will get angry at you and kill you with a sword. Okay? We don't have many, many examples where we go out of our way to delineate a specific punishment like this. Very, very bad. God, right, created this covenant, right? Mechamas, not from that Hamas, but from oppression, right? When they cry out, they are listened to. God makes a deal with us, and he says, not a deal, he makes a guarantee. He says, not only, right, again, this is to show how we throw the book at you, right? There are sometimes, right, we've seen this many times, where there are specific sins where if you do it, right, Molech, for example, right, there's 7 psukim in a row in Achrimos that says how heinous this crime is, right? This like reminds me of it a little bit, where it goes on and on and on and telling you how much this is abhorrent in the eyes of God. And in fact, the Gemara in Bava Metzia Nun Tes Amud Beis says that the tears, right? Remember, it talks about the Sharei Demos, right? The tears go up to God in heaven directly, right? Direct without stopping. That's what kind of oppression, horrible thing. So a little bit of a qualifier is that this is when you oppress the almana or the yasom, okay, for yourself, meaning you have it out for them. But what if the setting is a little bit different? It's a student and he's an orphan, right? And the Rebbe is trying to, make sure he understands. So then it's a little bit different. Oh, umanos. Here we go with the Rambam again for the 1,000,003rd time, where he talks about the importance of working, right? If you're keeping score at home. So here's another example where he says, if I'm trying to teach a trade to someone, right, and it's an orphan, and I'm a little bit stern with him or her, that's permitted. Or if they need, to quote Rabbi Dulit, some smack whack, it is absolutely permitted. Still, you should do it a little bit differently, right? Don't whack them too hard. Show that there's a little difference between them. Shenemar ki Hashem yariv rivam, because God will fight their fights. Wow. Echad yasam ha'av, echad yasam ha'em. This is what we said before. How do we define an orphan? Very controversial. Here the Rambam says it doesn't matter whether it's from a father, whether it's from a mother, although the Gemara a majority of the times assumes that it's from the father because the father is the one that supports the kid, and without support, the moms didn't work. So that's why we're worried about Yisomim and all the sugyas and Bava Basra and Ksuvas, all the dozens and dozens of blot that talk about rules about how to deal with Yisomim and collecting from them and all the various details, right? The assumption is that the father isn't around anymore. We don't really care. I'm sorry for the mothers out there, but at least in the Talmudic terminology, the mothers aren't that important, even though they do give birth. I'll throw that in. So the next question is, if you're 68 years old and your 99-year-old mother dies, are you a yasom? So, right? So that's a good question. So the answer is no. Ad shelo yeh tzrichin la'adam gadol lehisamech alav. Again, this is a very controversial line he ends the chapter with, but I'll say it anyway. It has to do with support. Right? There's a famous line called Katan Gadol v'somech al shulchan aviv katanhu. They call that Gushanpak. If you know the story with the Vilna Gaon, we'll talk about it some other time. But we are, all we care about halachically is where does the support come from. So if you don't need your parents anymore because you're on your own making your own money, then you are independent and you are not considered halachically a yasom. Very, very important line. I'll read it again. Ad shelo yeh tzrichin la'adam gadol lehisamach alav u'la'amnen u'litapal behen. If you don't need them to babysit and to work for you and to support you and to help you, eliyah osei kol tzarchei atzmo la'atzmo kishar kol gedolim. If you could manage on your own and support yourself like other adults, then you no longer need a parent, and therefore you're not considered a yasom. So I'll leave that alone for now. And that's how we end the chapter.